Hey dude, do you remember HTC? They made the first Android phone, the Thunderbolt, and the groundbreaking HTC One line. At one point, they were valued more than BlackBerry, Nokia, or Motorola. They were on top of the world, and then they just disappeared. They went from a 24% market share in 2011 to a 0% market share just 2 years later. So, what happened? How did the world's most beloved Android manufacturer just disappear? Okay, let's go back to the beginning. HTC started in Taiwan in 1997. Originally called High-Tech Computers Corporation, it was founded by Cher Wang, Peter Chow, and H.T. Cho. Cher was the daughter of the richest man in Taiwan, and is actually still the CEO of HTC to this day. They started out making portable computers, but quickly realized they were much better at making phones. They started getting really good at designing and manufacturing cell phones. And remember, this was the late 90s and early 2000s. The cell phone wasn't really a product yet. They were coming up with it as they were going along. They didn't produce their own phones though. They took contracts. Using their expertise, they would design and produce a phone using another company's money, and then that company would sell their phone. During this time, they landed some huge contracts with Compaq, then HP, Palm, and Sony. It was a really big deal for the company, and by 2002 they were one of, if not the biggest manufacturer on the scene. This was around the time when phones started to be considered smartphones. They were all very unique, had keyboards, and most importantly, they pretty much all ran Windows Mobile. This was the start of what I like to call the cell phone golden age. The market was booming, with nowhere to go but up. The 2000s were huge for HTC. In 2006, they finally decided to sell a phone under their own HTC brand. That year, they released 8 devices under the HTC brand, which all did pretty well. For the most part, they were Nokia, Palm, and BlackBerry knockoffs. But as the first HTC branded phones, they finally had some public recognition. Until then, nobody really knew that HTC was already making some of their favorite phones. In 2007, the iPhone was released, and it was a huge deal. It proved to HTC that a better OS existed. The only problem was they couldn't use it. They continued chipping away at the market, and just 2 years later, they had made quite a name for themselves. Then, in 2008, they got a call that would change the trajectory of HTC forever. It was from Google. They wanted HTC to help them make the first Android phone. I talked about it in my dedicated video, but this was a huge deal for the mobile phone market. Every mobile phone besides Apple at this point used either Windows Mobile or Windows CE. It was like having a watered down computer. It was clunky, with little freedom, and it sure didn't work well with a touchscreen. In the background, Andy Rubin had been working with Google since the iPhone came out to change that. His new operating system would be free, customizable, touchscreen compatible, and most importantly, open source. The opportunity presented to HTC here was a big one. As one of the world's most trusted manufacturers, it was up to them to make the world's first Android phone. So they did. They made the HTC Dream, also known as the T-Mobile G1. As their first phone on this new OS, it was kinda bad, but they didn't give up. They got back to work. In conjunction with Google, they continued to make more and more amazing Android phones. Over the next few years, they perfected their craft and released some historic phones. The HTC Magic, Hero, Tattoo, Desire, and Evo, just to name a few. With each one, they got much better, and with the Evo, they became the first cell phone with 4G. Ever. They were the ones leading the charge, and they kept going. By 2011, they had released the Thunderbolt. It ended up selling 16 million units, making it one of the best-selling phones of all time. HTC was on top of the world. 2011 was their most profitable year ever. Their phones accounted for 24% of all phones sold, and their 14-year-old company was the third most valuable in phone manufacturers, second only to Apple and Samsung. But this year was pretty much their last success. Every rise is followed by a fall. Profit wasn't the only thing that happened to HTC in 2011. They also got sued by Microsoft and Apple. The charge was patent infringement. Basically, the claim was HTC phones were only successful because they stole designs from other companies. HTC spent pretty much every dollar they had trying to win this case. They bought patents from pretty much every single company that was selling, trying to legitimize their designs, most notably spending $75 million on a collection of ADC telecom patents and a $300 million acquisition of S3 graphics. This was their biggest year of profits, so they could afford these expenditures to help win this case. Google, who was pretty much their big brother at this point, lent them a bunch of patents for this case as well. but they still lost. In order to settle, they had to sign a deal with Apple and Microsoft. This meant that from now on, the two companies would get a cut of every phone HTC would ever sell. This was a huge hit for HTC. That, with all of these patents they had just bought, meant that Q4 of 2011 was their first quarter of loss since 2002. Like any company that hasn't seen red in almost a decade, they started to get desperate. To increase profit margins, they entered a market that was kind of emerging at the time: budget phones. Deviating from the premium market they were known for. They released the Wildfire, the Cha-Cha, the Salsa. They made a huge mistake though. These phones weren't really special in any way. Budget phones are cheaply made, yes, but they still have to be good phones for the price. These phones were not that. They didn't have anything you couldn't get anywhere else for the same price. The only unique part of these phones was that they had a dedicated button to open up Facebook, which, let's be honest, nobody wanted. So they went from a little desperate to super desperate. They entered a mode that I call the scramble. BlackBerry did the same thing before they went under. They were so concerned about the competition, they started pumping out as many phones as possible, regardless of quality. It didn't work. Their plan ended up being cheap, poorly thought out, and missing HTC's original brand identity. They all had super random names. It was hard to figure out which was which. It's a pretty poor decision. Customers became overwhelmed by choice, discouraging them from buying. On top of that, making so many unique devices lowers the overall quality. Then, HTC's decisions went from super desperate to just stupid. They spent all of their money buying other companies. Not something I would suggest if you're about to go bankrupt. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on companies like OnLive, Dashwire, Magnet Systems, and Beats Electronics. They actually made money on that Beats deal, but everything else was a waste. By late 2012, they were basically done for. They had spent so much time, money, and effort trying to make a profit again, and in the process, they had forgotten to make good phones. Their once groundbreaking Sense UI seemed outdated. They hadn't really updated it, and instead it was just full of pre-downloaded crap. They were so focused on pumping out new phones to appeal to everyone that they alienated their original user base. Original features people once loved, like the SD card slot or the replaceable battery, had disappeared. They failed to capture a wider audience with their new phones, and in the process of trying, they lost their original loyal fans. They had lost pretty much all of their market share to Samsung. In 2014, they had pretty much dropped entirely off the market. They had essentially a 0% market share. They had lost their brand identity completely, and they had fumbled over 20% of market share in just 2 years. But they had one more trick up their sleeves. Not quite, but they decided to do something big. Something that would take them back to their roots. Use all of the knowledge they had acquired to make an amazing flagship phone. Something that once again would beat the competition. They were finally going to make a good phone. So they did. They rebooted their One line in 2013 and released the HTC One. No complicated names, no stupid gimmick. This was a proper flagship phone. A return to form. It had a headphone jack, a sturdy design, and a revolutionary speaker system. Shout out to Beats. They had finally done it. The phone sold 5 million units after just 2 months. That is a huge deal for HTC. They were almost out of money at this point, and it was their biggest phone launch ever. It even beat the Samsung S4 for a while, and many say it was a better phone. Any normal company would take this as a sign. Make good phones. Any normal company would turn around and take back their market share. But HTC wasn't a normal company. Something really weird happened. HTC just stopped trying. I couldn't find any reason why in my research. They just kind of dropped off the map. Sure, they still made phones, but none of them were very popular, and they were pretty much all using the same design. They weren't going to take any big risks like that one again. The One was a success, so they just keep doing that. This design is what their phones ended up looking like for the next 3 to 4 years. In 2017, they signed a $1 billion non-exclusive deal to Google. They could still make phones under HTC, they just also worked for Google. They went back to doing what they were best at back in the 2000s, making other people's phones, except now they were doing it mostly for Google. HTC still produces their own phones, but in very low volume. They used the recognizable names for their old popular phones and made boring, unassuming Android phones. For quite a while actually, like the last 7 years. And each year they made less and less money off of their own phones.
Yeah, I totally forgot to mention this in my script, but in 2019, HTC got in a bunch of trouble for releasing a crypto phone. It was kind of just a pointless cash grab, and also something that's less important, but I thought I should mention it. During this time, HTC also spent a bunch of money sponsoring Super Smash Bros. Melee teams, which is just awesome. If you guys have followed the channel for long enough, you know that I play Melee. I'm a Samus main. All right, back to the video.
Nowadays, their most popular phone is their U lineup. They actually rebooted it in 2023, and now they're marketed as enthusiast flagship phones for a decent price. They have great cameras on paper, a headphone jack, and expandable storage. Seems pretty cool. So they never quite made a comeback, but they're definitely still around. They sell incredibly low numbers of phones, but it seems that's okay, as they're able to supplement that with large contracts from other phone companies. So yeah, HTC was once a global smartphone superpower, but just like BlackBerry, they kind of fumbled. They tripped over their own feet at the height of their popularity and lost all staying power. Now, they make less popular enthusiast phones and help other companies manufacture their flagships. Thank you to Cameron Lewis, Aaron, Tohru, and Juno Knight for being members. I have more videos just like this one. Party on, dudes.